Hello, friends. This is the Alphalist podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the Alphalist podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply.
Welcome to the Alphalist podcast. I'm your host, Toby, and my guest today I'm actually looking forward to for ages is called Callum James Henderson Beck. I just found on Wikipedia, and people know him as Cal Henderson. And he's an O'Reilly author. He is author of the book Building Scalable Websites, and he's former chief architect of Flickr. And the biggest role I think people know him for is that he's actually the co-founder and CTO of Slack. So from my perspective, one of the most sticky applications. So today I want to talk to him about sticky applications. Cal, can you maybe tell us a bit more about yourself and also like how you get into the big game of being CTO and your nerd path?
Yeah, sure. So I guess going back a long way into the past, when I was a kid, I got exposed to computers and programming and realized that this is a way in which it's super creative and I can make things and other people can see them and experience them. And I knew I wanted to be a programmer when I grew up. And then in the kind of mid-90s, I got on the web for the first time and realized that it's this amazing platform for getting the things you build in front of other people. And so that other people can experience what you're doing, what you're making. And I just fell in love with it then and was like, switched from I want to be a programmer to I want to be a programmer and make things on the web. And that's kind of how my career got started. I just love making stuff. So, worked in the web industry now for a long time. I just really enjoyed creating stuff. I got matched up with my co-founders in the very early 2000s. So one of my co-founders, Stuart, the CEO of Slack, we've been working together across a bunch of different projects now for the last 20 years. And it started with video games. He had started a company to make an online web-based video game that was called Game Never Ending. It was a poor choice of names because it did end shortly after it started. But this very small team was just doing incredibly interesting technical work and creative work. It's kind of hard to imagine now in 2022, but online games where multiple people played with each other just were not a thing, in like 2001, 2002. And playing a game in the browser definitely wasn't a thing. And they were doing really interesting things with technology to make it seem real time and you had an experience with other people. And it was interesting from a creative artistic point of view as well. It was a really interesting social experience and I just wanted to be part of it. And so I harassed the company until I could be part of it. And that's how it kind of got kicked off. And that game didn't work out, but it turned into Flickr. We did Flickr for quite a while, went back, tried to make games again. The second game didn't work out and it turned into Slack. So it's a very roundabout way that we've ended up where we are today.
So how did you come to the idea of Flickr initially? Was it inspired by that very old free script? I think it was called Gallery in PHP or something, where you thought, okay, let's just make it a service and let's just make it good or great. Or how did that come?
It was it's a funny story. Flickr actually started as a real-time chat room where you could share photos with people by dragging them into the chat window. So it was much more like Slack than it was like the Flickr that eventually came out. And I don't know where the inspiration for that came from, but it was a really interesting idea. It was like real-time chat in the browser, built in Flash, which was the only way to do that at the time. And you could share photos. And we're really excited about the product. We built it really quickly, launched it, and then fairly quickly realized that you had to be online at the same time as other people if you wanted to use it. And this was in an era, this was early 2004, where people weren't online all the time. And they weren't online doing social activities with their friends all the time. And so we realized we should have like an asynchronous portion to this product as well. And we started putting photos on web pages. So you could upload a photo and have it on a web page and then share that with somebody else. And it seems astonishing now, but that at the time in 2004, we were really the first people to let you do that. There was a couple of, there was a small site in Brazil, I think, that kind of came before. But at the time, digital photos were just taking off for the first time. People had point and shoot digital cameras. They were just starting to gain momentum. And within the next couple of years, cell phones would start to have cameras for the very first time. But so people were taking a lot of digital photos, but didn't have anything to do with them. You could have them printed, or you could get them, printed like a regular photo, or you could have them printed on like a mug or a mouse pad or something like that. But that was kind of the limits of what you could do with digital photos. And we just happened to be there at the right time with this explosion of people taking digital photos and nobody really having anything to do with all of these photos they were taking. And we let people put them on the web for the first time. And so it spiraled in popularity, I guess.
And then was acquired. And what happened then?
Yeah. So the original idea for Flickr as a business was that we would quickly build this business on the side, and it would make some revenue, and that would let us focus on building the game, or really fund building the game. And in many ways, it just got too popular. And we realized that we were onto something with Flickr, and that it could grow and be a large growing business by itself. So we unfortunately, well, in retrospect, very fortunately, but at the time, reluctantly shelved the game and said, okay, we're going to focus on Flickr. And we did that really for about another year before it got large enough that we were either going to be raising capital or be acquired. And at the time, we chose to be acquired by Yahoo. And as part of that, we're based in Canada, and we moved down to the Bay Area, to Silicon Valley with the Yahoo acquisition, and it became part of Yahoo. And it grew there. Well, for the next 4 years, I spent the next 4 years at Yahoo growing Flickr from what was at the time of the acquisition fairly small and a fairly niche website into during its first few years at Yahoo was a really large kind of photo-oriented social network, and for a little while was larger and growing faster than Facebook. But unfortunately, we didn't keep that crown for long.
Okay. And back then, I mean, I remember like my early days on Flickr as well. It was a very sticky application. And I think like Slack now is one of the stickiest applications that I know from a user perspective, and also like from a CTO's perspective. It really like goes into the nervous system of your company and stays there for a very long time. You will never want to get off again. Do you have like a secret recipe of how you build really sticky websites? I mean, you told people about your recipe of building scalable websites, but is there one for stickiness?
I think it's fairly straightforward in a disappointing way. There isn't some amazing secret sauce, and the way to do it is spend a lot of time talking to customers and users and listening to their feedback. We spent early on in the Flickr days, everybody who joined Flickr, because at the time it was kind of more real time, was personally greeted by somebody who worked at Flickr and kind of given a tour of how to do things. I know that this has been replicated kind of a lot since, with the idea of doing unscalable things at the beginning of a company. But we're very hands-on with customers, talking to people who were using it, understanding what they liked, what they didn't, what the frustrations were. And that's definitely something that we've done over the last decade with Slack as well. We spent a huge amount of time talking to customers, listening to customer feedback, synthesizing that, and building, our prioritization of what we're going to do next, what we're going to improve, what we're going to invest in based on that feedback. I think for people building anything today, the most important tool and the most overlooked tool that anybody has kind of in their toolbox is Twitter. As Twitter has really changed the game on being able to talk to customers. So if you built a product, if you used a product, like you tried a new bit of software 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you found it frustrating, there's something bad about it, like the onboarding experience was confusing, it was buggy, you didn't understand how to use something, you would stop using it. And maybe you would tell your friends that you found it annoying and it wasn't very good, but probably not. You'd the threshold to like write into customer support and say your product is bad and here's why I think it's bad is incredibly high. People, regular people just don't do that. But then Twitter came along, and if you are slightly annoyed by something, or frustrated, or even impressed, and you like something, the threshold to going online and talking about that and sharing that with the world is really low. And that's such a good source of customer, kind of unfiltered customer feedback that more startups, more product companies should be using. We look at every tweet that talks about Slack, and we have done since the beginning of the company. And that is, at this point, millions and millions of pieces of customer feedback. And it's just an invaluable source of customer research, of unfiltered joy and unfiltered misery that we have used so much in prioritizing and understanding how we should evolve the product as we go. I think there's that counters this idea that great products are built by people who are product visionaries, who are amazing product designers. That part is also sort of true, but nobody is so good that they're going to design first the best possible product. It's always got to be, make an educated guess, get a lot of feedback, make another educated guess, get a lot of feedback. And that kind of iteration cycle that involves looking at what your customers are doing, listening to what they're saying, understanding the problems that they're having. It's the customer feedback is just the most important thing in kind of anything that's built for customers.
But isn't it somehow a combination of having that genius who every once in a while comes up with like a big idea and then validating it with customers? I think you still need that person. Right?
You can't randomly generate ideas, to reach success. There is definitely a portion of that, but I think when you look at really well designed products, or certainly ones that have reached like some level of broad success, what you don't see there is all the times when they built something the wrong way or had something that was broken or confusing because they've iterated towards that great product experience. And similarly, the people who are designing them, the designers, the product managers, the engineers, the whatever it is behind those products and services, they had great ideas, but they also had a whole bunch of terrible ideas, and they tried those out and then they moved on. And so I think that's that there is definitely, skill or taste involved in great consumer product design. But there's also a willingness to iterate and not be like so wedded to your first idea that you can't try something new, or that, you won't throw things away when they're not working. And so it's the same thing that it's successful companies aren't usually because somebody had an amazing idea. It's because they iterated and they executed. Because, there are a lot of people out there with great ideas, but it doesn't mean anything if you can't put it into practice. And then if you can't be flexible around evolving that idea as you get feedback, then you're just not going to reach that same level of success. Nobody is right 100% of the time. And when you look at really successful products, really successful companies, they definitely weren't right 100% of the time. But they did course correct. And I think that's becoming increasingly important. I think in general, as kind of work becomes more complex and, the technology and competitive environment becomes more complex, is that there's so many choices that need to be made, so many changes in direction, and that you have to be increasingly kind of nimble, agile, small a agile, to be able to change direction. And so the factors that really matter is really how quickly you can change direction, align, the vision of your product, your company around that change in direction, and keep being able to respond to feedback rather than getting, stuck in what you're sure is the best way to do things. I don't know.
So it's essentially all about execution, right? That's essentially it, that you have maybe an idea at the start. Let's face it, Slack is a bit like a reinvention of IRC, right? And
100%.
You had that idea of at a certain moment. Turning that into a business is kind of a genius idea, right?
Yeah, and I think Slack's a perfect example here, both in that the product that we have now is not, is pretty different from what we originally built, even ignoring the 4 years we spent making a video game. That's very different. But, the product has evolved pretty substantially. But also, it wasn't like a brand new idea. There was IRC in the late 80s, and I used it a ton in the 90s. And there'd been web-based things as well, like Campfire had been around, HipChat existed. There were other web-based, like forums have been around for a really long time. And it's took concepts from all of those. It is execution and iteration. It is, I also don't want to downplay how much it is the luck of timing. Timing is hugely important. When I look at either Flickr or Slack, if we had done the same thing a few years earlier, it wouldn't have been successful. And if we'd done it a few years later, we probably would have missed the boat and somebody else would have been there. And, in the case of Slack, there's a lot of external factors that all came together at just the right time. And usually it doesn't come down to like the day or the week or the month, but definitely the year. For Slack, we had a few different trends. One was the kind of the rise of consumer messaging in the consumer space. So the idea that you don't email your friends anymore. You text them or use WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or WeChat or whatever. So the people were a lot more used to moving from email, which is super formal, to messengers, and messenger apps were very familiar to people. At the same time, there's this huge explosion of using software in the workplace. Workplaces went from buying just a few pieces of software from large vendors to buying now hundreds or thousands of different apps and services, really driven by the SaaS model. And then there's the kind of consumerization of the enterprise because of the rise of smartphones, and social media that meant people have this really high bar for user experience that's been driven by the consumer side, because they install apps on their phone, and that has to be a great experience because that's how it captures users and makes money. That people have this expectation of great user experience for the things they use in their personal lives, and then starting to have that expectation in the workplace. And so it's no longer like a supposition. It's just how a lot of enterprise software works now. But we wanted to build something that people would love to use, as opposed to would be easy to sell into companies. And we didn't know any better. That's one of the reasons, is we knew how to make consumer software and consumer experiences. So we just did that for the workplace. And now that's, like having freemium software for work is pretty standard. Almost everybody does that. But a decade ago, that was a novel idea. But we lucked into the timing of that. It's not like we created that category or anything. It was coming just because of the kind of secular trends of how technology and its relation to the workplace was changing. So all that said, timing is hugely important. It plays, I think, the biggest factor in the success of the companies that I've worked on. Timing matters so much. And some of that's luck, some of that's skill. You see the trends, you attach yourselves to it. But it's a lot of luck.
You just mentioned Campfire, which was actually a tool built by 37 Signals back then.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think way earlier than Slack.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
And you said like timing is very important. I would also add maybe focus is also important, because the company was building multiple products. Or why did they fail with Campfire? Or why didn't they continue building it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and a better question for David or Jason than it is for me about why they discontinued that product. And I think the original discontinue of Campfire was about 6 months into us having launched Slack. So they were contemporaneous. It's not like they were in different decades or something. And it could be focus. It could also be while they are similar kind of products from a mechanical point of view, it was different in the audience we were going after, perhaps, or they have the channel-based piece, but the kind of two concepts at Slack from the beginning were channel-based, but also bringing in all of the other apps you use via the APIs and the platform. And I think that that made it a kind of different category of application. It was filling a different need. That, and we're concentrated on user experience so that you could have your non-engineers in there, and it didn't feel so much of a web-based IRC product. But honestly, who knows? It was our only product. It was the only thing we were doing, and so that does have a big advantage over one of a stable of products that you're building. It doesn't always work, obviously, because we had been unsuccessful in our previous game product, and that was all we were doing as well. But having a singular focus means you're much more likely to iterate on it until it's successful. Obviously, it's been 37 Signals now. Basecamp have been really successful, and some of that was having a few products and then seeing which one resonated the most and then doubling down on it.
Okay, thanks a lot. I actually had David in the podcast here twice, I think. And in the first podcast, he actually ranted heavily against notifications from especially from Apple Watch, but also from Slack, and how that essentially destroys your brain and makes you defocus. And I think for some jobs, like for developers potentially, this is also true, because you need those large blocks of uninterrupted deep work. How do you think about that, and also the right to be offline as someone who builds a product that fires a lot of notifications?
Yeah, it's a good question, and obviously David's point of view is going to be somewhat grounded in his business and who he competes with. But it's not completely wrong point. And definitely when I look at the way we at Slack use Slack, it is important to be able to disconnect and it not be, whether that's outside of working hours. So, you're able to set boundaries and have good work-life balance, or kind of, as you say, when there are periods where you want to do deep work and stay focused. And so, there are kind of two sides to that, or a bunch of things that we provide within product, but, I'll talk about those, but I think it's still largely a case of how organizations use tools culturally. So when Flickr was acquired by Yahoo, at the time, Yahoo was very heavily into using Yahoo Messenger. So Yahoo Messenger, like AIM, AOL Messenger, like MSN, like ICQ at the time, was mostly one-to-one messenger. There was some group stuff, but nearly everybody just used it one-to-one. And the Yahoo as a company ran on it, and you'd get DM'd constantly all day from people all around the company. And there were definitely things that were frustrating about the way the company chose to use the product. The message that was sent the most, thousands of times a day, was YT, which means "Are you there?" Instead of sending somebody a message, you would ask if they were there first, which was such a weird kind of interaction of time wasting, sending a preamble before every message, and that felt very interrupty. Something that we wanted to do with Slack was that it's similar to how some people used IRC, was that it's great for both synchronous, but it's also fine for asynchronous. Like, I can put a message up there, you can read it 12 hours later and respond to it, and I can read that response 12 hours later, or we can be talking in real time. But it's very much, that's all dependent on how you choose to use it as a tool. And so, for instance, within Slack, we're very good about setting our do not disturb hours, so we know people won't get notified outside of working hours. We use custom status within Slack to say when people are busy. Many people have it hooked up to their calendar, so it will let you know if somebody's in a meeting or if somebody's working on a project and isn't available right now. And you can silence notifications within Slack for a custom period of time or until a certain date. And we do use that liberally, saying, for the next 2 hours, I just need to focus on this, writing this document, writing this piece of code. And so I'm not going to receive any notifications. I think it's, philosophically what we built in the product is the idea that you can message anybody at any time, and it's up to them to choose when they want to see the notifications around it. And so long as you know whether they're going to get notified or whether you need to, escalate it via another channel because this is an emergency and you really need to get in contact with somebody, I think that works really well if people choose to set it up like that. I think it is also, while Slack for Slack customers can be a big part of that, it is just a growing trend in kind of the way software and especially kind of cell phones have brought themselves into our lives, and the place they have there with this the idea that 20 years ago there was a difference between being at home and being at work, and not many people were online all of the time outside of the office. But increasingly over the last decade, there's this idea that everyone is semi-working all of the time. You're always kind of available. You always have a phone with you. You're always online. And I think ultimately that's not super healthy for work-life balance. We, within Slack, the company, strongly encourage people to have a good, clean separation between when you're at work and when you're not, when you're available and when you're not. I think that's been especially difficult for people over the last couple of years with the pandemic of, you're no longer even changing locations between when you're at work and when you're not. So that's increasingly important to define those boundaries. I'm really careful about doing that myself. Like you, I have 2 young kids, and I want to make sure I'm carving out the time to spend with them and not always just half working on my phone. And so I think it's a cultural issue, as much as it is a technology one around how we choose to structure our working lives and our personal lives. That said, with that as a backdrop, something that we've done at Slack within our engineering and product organization for quite a while now is every 6 weeks we have a week where we get rid of all recurring meetings, and we call these a maker week, where engineers can just focus on writing code, like for a whole week, no interruptions, and maybe you're collaborating with some colleagues on something that you're working on, but allowing that deep focus. And we also do that kind of every Friday as well. And in some ways, like you need time for doing that deep work, whether it's engineering, whether it's document writing, research, the kind of pure individual work, or, like focused work time. But a lot of it is not necessarily, maybe this is what David was getting at as well, it's not necessarily not having meetings or doing other supporting work, because increasingly, like, making software products is collaborative. You need to spend a lot of time with other people. But that having contiguous blocks of focus time is the really difficult part. It doesn't matter if 30% of your time is spent in meetings, if that 30% is spread out evenly throughout all of your days, because that just means you don't get any blocks of focus. And I think having those blocks of focus time is really important.
Yeah, that is what I also realized. I'm using a tool called Reclaim AI for a while, and it's really brilliant that you can do it manually as well. That you can just schedule or have a tool that just schedules focus time for you, and tries to do that in a connected way, and tries to put your one-on-one somewhere else and so on. That's really brilliant. And it's what I realized, that I have so much more time when I actually plan focus time than I had before, and so much more focus on stuff that's really great. And one thing that I actually admire Slack for is the fact that you actually build in all the features that most mobile messaging tools, like in Europe, WhatsApp is quite popular. All the features that WhatsApp has for a while, like voice messages, video messages, and so on, that you build it into Slack as well, because I essentially don't want people to take the shortcut to my brain through just sending me a WhatsApp. And in Slack, I can actually configure when I'm available and when I'm not. So that's way better from my perspective. So that kudos for that.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. You have a lot more customization around choosing when to be notified, and you can use Slack in a batch mode. But the other thing that Slack depending on how organizations use it, forces people to do is because of the channel structure, it forces some of the categorization on the sender instead of just the receiver. If you think about your email inbox, everybody just sends you email to an address. It's up to you to figure out, maybe you're one of these people who has a tons of rules and folders and labels, or maybe you're the person who, one of the people who just has this massive undifferentiated pile of email that they slog through every day. But, a channel-based tool like Slack forces the sender to think, is this for you directly? Is it about a project? Is it for my whole team? And to categorize it and put it at least somewhat in the right place, which really helps on the consuming side, because I can say, well, this DM from my boss, okay, I'm going to read that. And I can read that first. And then my team channel and the project I'm working on channel. And then maybe I can leave these other channels for another day. And maybe I'll read them once a week because I find this interesting. Or in fact, I'm just going to ignore this because for the next couple of months, I don't care about what's going on in that channel. And that, like, forcing some of the categorization on the sender, I think is a very small piece, but is pretty key in making it more manageable.
So before we talk about the tech stack you've built, like just quickly, just a bit provocative. How do you want to make sure that like after being acquired by Salesforce, you don't end up similar to Heroku? Like, sorry for being provocative here, but I mean you know like what happened there, and you also know what happened to Flickr at the end. Mm-hmm. And I guess you're very committed as a founder team. How do you make sure that the product continues to be great?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, like answering the Flickr question first is not every product is going to be great forever or kind of have prime spot forever. And in the case of Flickr, Flickr's 20 years old at this point, just coming up on it. And so, and not just that, but the world moved on in terms of the products that people were looking for. Flickr was a place to archive your digital photos so that you could share them with other people. And these days we have kind of Google Photos and iCloud for the storage portion without sharing it. And people text photos, and photography as a social network is just not as big a concept as it was 15 years ago. And so it's okay that it's not, that it's not huge, and not everything has to kind of last forever in the same state or keep growing. That said, I love Flickr as a product, but I haven't been working on it for the last 15 years, so it's been a long time. Slack, I think the only way products stay high quality and relevant is if they have great people working on them who love the product, and it can be a sustainable business. Having failed twice in games and then worked on the consumer side in Flickr, something that's really great about Slack is the business is so straightforward. We make software and sell it for money, and people pay for it because it's useful. And that just makes everything much easier. There's no tension between how we make money and what users want to do with the product. Because it's not ad-supported consumer side, there's just no tension there, which is a really nice thing to have. And been working on Slack for a long time, but it still brings a really big amount of kind of day-to-day joy to me and the other people on the founding team. Still, as successful as we've been, as much of it's grown, and all these organizations use it to run their organizations around the world. Still, I go into a coffee shop and I see somebody using Slack on their laptop, and I don't know what they're doing for work. I don't know what they're working on. I don't know who they are, but I see them tapping away on Slack. It just brings so much kind of joy to see that impact that our work has out in the world, that it's just addictive to want to keep working on that. It just has, it has an influence on so many people. And that's hard to ever give up.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and sorry for being provocative. So
no, it's all good.
Can you tell us a bit more about your tech stack? I mean, are you using PHP? You're using Electron. That's most people know actually in the mobile world that you're one of the most popular Electron users. What else does this stack consist of?
Yeah. So we have, it's a client server model. We have 3 different client code bases. There is the desktop and web client, which is really the same code base. So you can use it in a modern browser, or you can use it in our desktop app, which is Electron. So that runs on Chrome. When Electron started a little bit after we started Slack, and we spent the first couple of years trying to find the right technology for a cross-platform desktop app where it was still running our web app, because Slack is, it turns out, hugely complicated. There's a lot of features that most people aren't exposed to, that especially on the enterprise security administration compliance side, and there's a huge amount of surface area there. Having to only build, as we do today, 3 client code bases instead of what would be 6, maybe, if we didn't have a cross-platform desktop app, is such a huge lever for us, especially early on. So we were really happy with Electron when it came out, and have worked a lot with contributing back to Electron. I'm really happy to see where it's at today, in terms of VS Code ending up so popular, and the contributions back from that as well. As just sad to see the announcement that Atom is no more in the last couple of days. So that, really kicked everything off. So we're Electron on the desktop. And we have native iOS and Android clients. They are completely separate code bases, completely native, and always have been. The iOS code base is basically entirely Swift at this point, and the Android code base is kind of half and half Java and Kotlin. In the old days, we used to have a Windows Phone client as well that was written in C#, but we discontinued that kind of when Windows Phone got discontinued. Although somehow still we have a very low number of weekly active users who are still using our last Windows Phone build on their remaining Windows phones, which is kind of funny.
And sometimes maybe also not too nice, right? If you have to maintain that.
That one it's kind of astonishing that it still works, honestly, because we haven't put out a patch for that in many years. The operating system hasn't received any updates, but you're still able to connect to Slack using clients that old, technically, even though we haven't supported them for a long time. Then kind of on the back end, we have today, Slack runs on hundreds of different services, doing all kinds of different bits of coordination of different features of the service. But say the core of it is two constellations of services. One is the kind of web-based RPC style API that powers most of Slack and is powers the website as well. And then there's the real-time system, which is WebSocket based. So when a Slack client starts up a session, it establishes a WebSocket to the Slack servers and gets events in real time. So if you're sending me a message, I get that pushed to me over a WebSocket. And the web app side started in PHP, but for the last 5 years has been Hacklang, which is a Facebook's typed PHP running on HHVM. And we're entirely strict typed Hacklang these days for all of our for our kind of web app code base. That's our biggest code base at Slack. And then on the real-time side, it's a constellation of different servers that run in, many data centers around the world, so that you're connecting to something close to you, that are a constellation of services written in some in Java and some in Go that handle all of that WebSocket and event fan out and event replay.
Okay, so it's all proprietary, or is there one large backbone for PubSub in the background, or is there actually IRC running somewhere?
No, and Slack today is orders of magnitude bigger than IRC ever was, even at its peak. It's all proprietary, so all of the kind of the fan out, the PubSub, the message distribution piece is all proprietary, and we deliver a very high volume of messages a second, 24/7. So it's a very big, high volume distributed system that's all custom to Slack.
Do you have a peak number you can actually announce?
I'm not sure I have any numbers I'm allowed to share. We should do a stats and internal stats post at some point to talk about messages per second and events per second. But it's some very high numbers for kind of any real time system. But nothing I can share today, unfortunately.
It's somewhere in the millions, I guess, then, right?
Yeah, definitely in the millions.
Okay, cool. Yeah, very interesting. And do you run on Kubernetes, or like, how do you actually maintain this?
Yeah, I mean, historically, because we predate Kube, we were VMs. We're an AWS. That we run almost entirely on AWS, and we used to be entirely VMs. Today, it's a mix. We have a lot of services, especially stateless services that run on Kube, and we still have a lot of VMs as well. We've been moving more towards container-based, and then container-based running on Kubernetes. And that's the general direction we're going for most things.
So thanks a lot. Really interesting. Like, I'd love to do an internship at Slack, maybe at a certain point. Do you have a tool? Like, I mean, we're all nerds in a way. And I myself, I discover a tool every few months that I really love and annoy all my friends with. Do you have like such a tool that you like really fell in love with? Like maybe some open source or something?
I think one of the things that I've liked most that is we built one ourselves, but there are definitely open source alternatives. Is our internal kind of data warehouse runs on like Hive and Presto, and that contains all of our log data and all of our kind of primary database data. And early on at Slack, and I think there's a Twitter thread about this somewhere recently, somebody created a web page where you could enter a SQL query, run it against our data warehouse that might take seconds or might take minutes, depending on how much data it's looking over, and then we'll give you tabular data back or turn it into really simple graphs. And then you can, within Slack, if you work at Slack, you can paste the URL to that query into Slack, and we will show the graph in line, or show the data table in line by using custom unfurling, which is an API feature in Slack. And it is such a underappreciated productivity boost to be able to really, like, somebody asks you a question about something and you can just share the results and see it right there, and it's coming live from the real data. And it's such a time saver. And there are things like, using Apache Superset, or there's commercial products that do that as well. But having that ability to answer arbitrary questions about things that are happening in the product. And this could be, events that are coming into a particular service, or kinds of errors that are being thrown, or number of customers who have done some kind of action, or number of messages that fit some criteria sent in this time window. So it's kind of anything about the business that can be asked and answered. Although there's quite tight controls around actual customer data, which you can't access through that system. But okay. I think that kind of internal analytics is really important to being able to iterate and understand the products you're building.
It's actually also very, very important if you found your new company to have such a system in place, right? I don't know if you know Metabase, for example. It's open source, but also commercial. Mm-hmm. Or IPython notebooks or Zeppelin notebooks, that essentially goes into the same direction, right? Yes. So you build notebooks for Slack. Then that's nice.
Yeah, and the notebook stuff that's happened in the last few years has been really good. And I know our data team is kind of shifting to more of the notebook interface and hooking that up to our internal data. And I think that's now the essential thing that people need to do fairly early on. I think it is both good and bad, but one of the big changes over the last decade has been that the number of, if you're starting a web product company, the number of things that you have to do has just gone up massively, probably grown exponentially in terms of features that you have to provide to customers and tools that you need to build or set up internally is just much higher. And that's because you need to do that to be able to compete, because other people are doing it too. But there's just such a set of rich tools available. 20 years ago, when we were first building Flickr, there was nothing. You just had to invent all of that stuff yourself. And now there's such a kind of rich community of people building tools, open source, commercial versions too, but sharing the techniques, like how you go about doing these things and what are the tools that you need to be able to understand services as you build them, whether it's like logs and tracing and the evolution that side has taken, or internal data and how you look at how your products are being used and visualize that and tie all those data sources together. it is great that there's just all of these tools and all of these techniques that are now shared and that we can all use to make better products, make them faster, do it more reliably, more accurately. There's just all this supporting infrastructure, and it only grows every day. It's hard to keep up with, but it's all good stuff to keep up with. It's great.
Reminds me of PHP MyAdmin.
Man.
So, apart from that, do you have a productivity hack that you would recommend everyone?
My productivity hack is going to be a Slack tip, I would say, or I'll start with a Slack tip, and that would be you should definitely use Command K or Control K to switch between channels. That's the quick switcher. It's like the Spotlight find on macOS, and you can do Command K, type a couple of characters, hit Enter, and switch to a channel. And if you do that, then you can switch it so that the channels in your sidebar for Slack are only showing channels with unread messages. It's an option if you click on the little 3 dots by the channel list. And that means your channel list is, things that you need to read. And when you're going to a channel to send a message, you quick switch there. And it just changes the mode completely of how people use Slack. So that's my Slack tip. I'd say the other tip is be really intentional about disconnecting from work. And, if you're able to do that, you can get more done when you work and have a much better work-life balance. Especially if you work from home, setting those boundaries between, this is the morning and I'm not yet at work. Now I'm at work and now it's the end of my day and I'm not, can be really huge for productivity. Instead of, being sort of productive all the time, periods of intense focus are much easier if you have periods when you're not focusing and when you're able to disconnect and think about something different. And that's not important for everyone, every stage of their life. When I was younger, I spent a lot more time working. But I think it's, obviously become more important for me as I've gotten older and further along in my career, but also especially over the last couple of years, being able to disconnect to avoid burning out is really important.
Yeah, if you have kids, you will remember those words here. So then just as a closing question, I have a little surprise for you. Your co-founder, Stuart, told me about a hidden feature in Slack, which is called the time machine command. And it's very simple. You just have to hit /time machine. And we now hit /time machine Cal in 2005, which was the time when you worked at Flickr together. And we observed yourself for a while now and travel back in time, observe yourself for a while. And now you have the chance to whisper something into young Cal's ears. What would it be?
This question is really difficult because, on the one hand, we failed to make the game the second time that we really wanted to make. And we definitely made a lot of poor technical decisions early on in Slack and poor product decisions as well, things which we later had to go back and fix, or, we still deal with the fallout of today. That said, it's hard to want to change anything because, if you make the perfect technical decisions, then you come up against other problems, and who knows if we would have been able to tackle them. There's definitely some technical decisions that we made that maybe I'd hint that isn't the way we should do things. So the biggest one for us that took the longest time to unwind was when we first built the product. We thought that Slack would be for teams of 5 to 50 people. And a lot of the technical architecture was based around those assumptions. And that was a lot of data is sharded or partitioned by customer, which is great when your customers are small. And now we have customers who have millions of users and millions of seats and billions of messages. And we had to rethink totally our kind of sharding and partitioning strategy around data. And also we added things later like Slack Connect share channels that blur the boundaries between individual organizations. So there's some of those technical underpinnings pieces, but it's also been an incredible last decade working on those problems. So I don't know. I just say to myself, it's going to be a real fun ride. Work really hard.
So thanks a lot, Cal, for being in the podcast. I really enjoyed the time with you, and wish you all the the luck in the world for Slack, and really looking forward to see what comes up next. Like, I really love huddles, for example,
Oh yeah,
I think you do amazing stuff there. So hope it all continues like this, and looking forward to maybe meet you whenever I'm in the US. So thanks a lot.
That'll be great, and thank you so much for having me today. It's been great.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the AlphaList podcast. If you like this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. AlphaList is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on AlphaList, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.